Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at our second BioBus student town hall. I wanted to let everybody know what that image was. First of all, at BioBus, we love microscopes. We have all different kinds of microscopes. We have microscopes that are small to ones that are big, but all of them magnify things. So the microscope that we used to be able to create this image was an electron microscope, which is a very special microscope because it doesn't use lights to see things, it uses electrons. And guess what the small thing was? I think if you want to put some stuff in the chat, we can see what are your guesses and we'll see who was close. It was actually a bee proboscis. It's the thing that bees shoot out into their mouth and suck up the nectar and put it back into their whole body. So it's pretty cool, right? So today we're going to talk about COVID-19. And thank you again for coming. And I want to give you first a huge introduction of what BioBus is. So BioBus, we're a nonprofit organization. We're located in New York City. And again, we have a really big, strong love of science. And we want to share our love of science with you. And the way that we do that is really by two different ways. So we have this mobile lab that's filled with microscopes. So we go to schools and kids can come aboard during their normal science class and do experiments with us. But you know, because we're at home right now, we can't go to your school, but we still want to interact with you guys. But we have one more way that we interact. We have a community lab called BioBus Harlem, which is located in New York City in Harlem at the Columbia Zuckerman Institute. And here we have after school programs and you can sign up for summer camp. We have public events once a month. And we also do research with our high school interns and our college interns. So we'd love to see you at BioBus very soon. So today I'm joined by two wonderful scientists, Nina and Joel, and also another BioBus scientist named Gnädig. So we're going to answer all of your questions from about COVID-19. So we asked you guys to submit questions and guess how many we got back? We got over 400 questions. So that is super exciting. We're gonna try to answer as many as we can, but if you can't get to your question, don't worry, we'll try to figure out ways to get the answer to you. But we want you to also know that you're gonna be able to ask questions in the chat. And if you want us to answer your questions, you say at BioBus. Well, right now I'm going to let our two scientists introduce themselves. Nina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for having me. My name is Nina. I am a scientist at Columbia University Medical Center, more specifically a microbiologist. So I like to look at everything that is tiny, that we cannot see with our naked eye, and that makes us really sick. That might be parasites, that might be viruses or bacteria. On a daily basis, I work on malaria parasites, but I also worked on viruses and learned a lot about them. And so I'm very interested scientifically, of course, also in the current outbreak because it affects so many people. And so I hope that today I can answer some of your questions together with my co-chair, Joel, who will introduce himself now.
Thank you, Nina. My name is Joel Oppenheim. I'm a professor of microbiology, like Nina is a professor of microbiology at New York University School of Medicine. I'm also the former dean of the graduate programs at NYU, and my main area of research is infectious diseases and how bacteria cause infections. I also have been very actively involved in teaching microbiology to high school students, college students, medical students, and even doctors I teach classes to. I'm very much looking forward, like Nina is, to answering the great questions you guys submitted to us. And so let's get started, Nina.
I want to, Danny, can you also introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Danny. I'm a scientist at the BioBus. I'm handling all the chat related things. So I'm watching the chat for your questions, and I'm going to be relaying your questions over to everybody. And so if you do have questions, make sure that you put @BioBus in the chat, and I'll make sure that they get answered.
Awesome, thank you guys. Again, my name is Natasha, and I just wanted, before we get started, I wanted to just say that we're not medical professionals, we are scientists, and we want to help everyone understand the science of the virus. And I want to set some ground rules. So scientists, you have 1.5 minutes to answer the questions. And then if you see Robbie the rabbit, that means you need to wrap it up. All right, so let's get started. Okay, Joel, can you give us a, the first part we're gonna do, first of all, we're gonna talk about virus basics. So in the chat, if you have any questions about the basics of virology, go ahead and put your questions in. And Joel, can you give us a basic overview of COVID-19 and the coronavirus?
Sure, I'll be glad to, Natasha. Is my screen up? Hold on. Danny, do you have my screen up? No? Okay, so I'm going to give you just sort of a broad overview, and then Nina and I will start going into more specifics with you a little bit later. So first of all, let's start out what a virus is. So a virus is an infectious agent that can only replicate within a host. It can't replicate by itself. You will hear a lot more about this, as said from Nina, as we move on. Coronaviruses are one class of viruses, which primarily cause respiratory infections in humans and animals. COVID-19 is the respiratory illness, which is caused by a newly identified coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2. Viruses work by hijacking cells in the body and taking over them. Once they enter, they start reproducing and then subsequently kill the infected cell, causing tissue damage. And this releases the virus and then allows the virus to infect the next cells over or transfer throughout the body, causing different foci of infection. The coronavirus, as we said, affects mostly the respiratory system, which is a group of organs involved in how we breathe. That includes your throat, that includes the airway passages, that includes the lungs and all its structure. Early symptoms of coronavirus may include coughing, shortness of breath, or even some fever. In some cases, it can cause severe damage to the lungs, leading to pneumonia and acute respiratory. I saw it. Let me just finish this. Acute respiratory distress, and a whole variety of things could also appear, including runny noses in people, headaches, backaches, difficult sleeping, chills, sweats. It's exasperated by if you have other diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and also seen in older adults. The vast majority of infected patients, however, do not show symptoms of disease and recover naturally. However, 1 to 20% of show severe symptoms and need emergency medical care. Over the next 45 minutes, Nina and I will try to answer some of the great questions that you submitted. Nina.
Okay, thank you, Joel, for that. So, Nina, this is a question from Jack, who's 7. What does the coronavirus really look like?
All right, Jack, that is a great question. Thank you for that. First of all, I wanted to share a very interesting website that points to how shows you how little viruses actually are. As Joel just mentioned, they infect our cells. So they're tiny, but to give you a more visual impression, here you can see it's called, it's a coffee bean, and everybody has seen a coffee bean. And as we zoom in, you get to see a sesame seed, a grain of salt. That's all things that we can still see by the naked eye. And as we go closer and closer, we come by a paramecium. Maybe you have seen that already with BioBus. That is already very hard to see, probably impossible to see by eye without a microscope. And then you go to a skin cell, which you can, if you look at your skin, you cannot differentiate by eye, right? The red blood cell, so that's what constitutes our blood. And then here we get to a bacteria. And even a bacteria compared to a virus is huge. And when we look at coronavirus, we're looking at a virus that is about as big as influenza virus, or the flu virus. You might have heard about it. And it's very close also to the measles virus size. Anyway, so we will provide you the link and you can check it out later, this fantastic website. I also wanted to show, so when we look at viruses though, we need some very special microscope. Latasha already mentioned that, and those are electron microscopes. And these electron microscopes show us that the virus looks like this. It's round, and it has these projections around it, which are actually viral proteins that attach to the host cell. And they fit, and if they fit like a key in a lock, the virus can enter the host cell and infect you. And coronaviruses have been named coronaviruses because of their crown-like shape, their crown-like appearance, and the Latin word corona actually means crown. So this is what a coronavirus actually looks like.
Okay, thank you, Nina. All right, Joel. This is a question from Sophia, and she's 11, and we've got a lot of these questions. So, where do new viruses come from?
So they're actually not new viruses. They're actually viruses that exist in other animals that by accident get transmitted to humans. And within humans, they will then potentially cause disease. There are a large number of them known. Probably the most familiar ones are rabies, SARS, Ebola, MERS, influenza. And this is just to name a few. There are thousands of different species of viruses out there. So emergence of these and other human diseases occur when an established animal virus switches host. So it may go from a pig to a human, or from a chicken to another animal and then to human. And as it moves from one animal to the other, it actually changes slightly, and it changes its virulence, or its ability to cause disease. And we only see the results of this when it moves into the human population. And we call these new emerging viruses, but in fact, they're just modifications of pre-existing viruses, just that they've come into a new host now.
Okay, thank you for that question. I have a follow-up question from Eowyn. She wants to know, how often do animal diseases cross to humans?
A lot. Just think about influenza every year. We see these different diseases pop up probably about every 10 to 15 years, where we see major diseases come when an animal virus gets transmitted into humans. So we're talking about an awful large number. If you think every year, when you talk about millions of people getting influenza, there's not just one strain of influenza, there's lots of different strains of influenza. And these end up causing disease when they get into us.
Okay, thank you so much. Danny, do you have any questions from the chat?
Yeah, okay. Well, the first question we have is from Bethany's World. And the question is more of a transmission-based question, so we can kind of use this as a segue. How long does coronavirus stay in the air? Does the time the coronavirus stay in the air depend on the air quality on a rainy Wednesday?
Okay.
Oh, okay, Joel, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. So according to the latest studies, a couple of papers actually just came out this morning. It really depends on is this the result of a sneeze? Is this the result of a cough? Or is this just the result of us normally talking to each other? If you sneeze or cough a lot, if you ever looked in a mirror, if you do it, you'll see little droplets all over coming out of your nose or your mouth. These droplets are actually fairly heavy and will sink to the ground pretty quickly. That's why they warn you, they request that you stay 6 feet apart or not, because a lot of these droplets will then just fall to the ground and stay there, or they'll fall on different items that are around. Even though they fall to the ground or fall on different items, the virus will still stay viable for a period of time. And that will really depend on the temperature of what it falls on and the makeup of the substance. So on paper, if a droplet falls on paper or plastic, it actually will stay there for a number of hours. If it falls on soft clothing or onto the ground, it actually then stays there a less of a period of time. This is not just if you sneeze, it's just not going to spread all over the place. It'll stay within a radius of where you're in fact standing at any given time.
Okay, great. Do we have one more question, Danny, from the chat?
Yeah, sure. This is from Catherine Wimbley. How is COVID-19 different than the other types of coronavirus, and why is it harder to kill?
Nina, would you like to take that one?
Right, so there's certainly several components to these questions and several ways this questions can be answered. What I want to say is that this is an emerging virus. So unlike the other coronaviruses that we see every winter and that come back seasonally and that our bodies in a way know, this one, none of us had seen before. So our immune system is completely unprepared. That means it can hit us very hard and make us really sick, as you can see. And so that's one part that I wanted to mention. Other than that, this virus compared to, for instance, the SARS coronavirus of 2003 that you might have heard about, transmits very much more easily because it can transmit from people that don't show any symptoms or very slight symptoms. That's why for us, it's very hard to contain and it's hard to detect at first. And by the time we actually find it and detect it, it has already spread over multiple people. And that's why it's hard to kill it. And also because it's a very new virus that we didn't know before, we obviously don't have, unfortunately, a treatment for it yet, and we don't have a vaccine for it yet. And so that will take another while to get that figured out. But eventually we will find a cure, don't worry.
Okay, so Nina, I have another question here from Lucy, who's 13. And she said, why are the main suspected cases that explain where COVID-19 came from? What are the main suspected causes, that explains where COVID-19 came from? This is her words, not me. Bonus points if after answering this question, the scientists can make a few remarks about how people have used all of China and Asian people and in general as scapegoats, and why that's garbage behavior.
All right, Lucy. Yeah, very interesting question, and we wish we would know more about it, I think. What we know for sure is that this virus has its natural host in bats. It's a bat virus. It infects bats. It doesn't make them sick. But somehow or another, that bat virus made its way, like Joel explained very nicely before, into humans. Whether that happened directly from bat to human or whether that happened through an intermediate host, which could be any other mammal, that is not known. There was one suspected animal, it's the pangolin, which probably I've never seen. It's quite a cute creature, and I want to show it to you, that lives in China and is actually being consumed there. It's quite of a delicacy. Here you can see the little pangolin, and the virus that was found in the pangolin was quite similar to the one that was found in the human. So it's maybe a possible hypothesis, but we don't know for sure. What I wanted to say also is that, yes, the virus originated in China. That doesn't mean that Chinese or Asian people are more prone to have it or to transmit it. We are all humans. We're all made the same way. We're all susceptible the same way to this virus. And yes, to what Latasha mentioned as a comment, it's not a fair behavior to therefore suspect these people to have the virus or act in any bad mannered way towards them.
Just an additional follow-up on that, Nina. Probably the most well-known of any of these pandemics was the Spanish flu of 1918. However, the Spanish flu did not begin in Spain. It actually began on a chicken farm in Kansas, most likely. And we don't call it the Kansas flu, and we don't make any disparaging remarks about the state of Kansas or the country of the United States where that infection began. So it just, and that's one of the reasons the name of the virus got changed, and they simplified it because they purposely, the World Health Organization wanted to give it a name that didn't give any disparaging context to another country or a country. And that's why it's called COVID-19, where there's no mention of what country it came from.
Thank you, scientists. I have one other question, and this is for Nina. Did the coronavirus escape from a laboratory? This is from Jalil, and he's 13.
Most indications are it did not escape from a laboratory. It actually appeared to escape from a shopping center in Wuhan, in China, where they had lots of these rather esoteric animals that people would come and buy in order to eat. And when you mix these animals together, they invariably will sneeze and cough and release substances that in fact will infect other animals within that environment. And so that's where it most likely began.
I can add something? Can I add something?
Of course.
Just as a second, yeah, thank you. I was Joel for this. I was just going to add that also the way this virus infects our cells, it attaches very tightly to our human lung cells. And when we look at the virus now as it circulates in us, and we compare it to what the computer would have predicted, the computer wouldn't have thought that it would be such a tight binder. So even if somebody would have tried to predict it artificially and make the virus, it's very unlikely because the computer didn't show that what we actually see in the lab when we test it. So it probably wasn't spilled from the lab. None of the labs works with a virus that looks like the one is circulating in us right now. So the viruses that are commonly used to study coronaviruses in general do not resemble at all the virus that we have now. So.
Thank you, Nina and Joel. If you're just tuning in, my name is Latasha and I'm here with Joel and Nina, and we're taking your questions about coronavirus. So Danny, can you let us know if there are any good questions from the chat?
Yeah, we're getting quite a few good questions now. One that I think is in this, a good one for this category is from Patricia Hornack. The virus is not alive, so how can it reproduce, like in the lungs?
Nina, can you answer that, please?
So that's true. The virus is not alive. The virus absolutely needs your cells, whatever cells it prefers. In the case of coronavirus, it's lung cells, to be able to replicate. So, but the virus brings the minimal things that it needs. It brings its protein to attach those little ones that spike out of its envelope, the S protein that you saw on the graphic. It brings that protein to attach to your cell and to enter it. And then it releases its genetic material. And that's all it needs. This has been this will be read and translated all by your cellular machinery. It hijacks your cell. It uses all the cellular organelles that it needs to multiply. And then it will be reassembled within your cell until the cell bursts, and then all the viruses come out. So that's how there's a big debate whether viruses are alive or not alive or semi-alive, I would say. Maybe you could call it alive during the period it's in your host cell, and once it leaves, it's sort of just an infectious agent, as Joel said.
Great, thank you, Nina. Danny, do we have one more question?
Yeah, let's get to this question from Liz Marie Diaz. Does the virus survive through heat?
It really depends on what level of heat you're talking about, both heat and cold. It will, at high temperatures, very high temperatures, you could actually sterilize something, hot water or putting it in an autoclave. You will kill or you will inactivate the virus. Normally in most viral infections, especially those that are respiratory, they seem to hit a peak in the winter months and start getting much less during the summer months. And there's actually very dramatic differences in temperatures, such as like the North Pole or far north Canada. There's practically no incidence of coronavirus, or in super hot environments, such as a desert, there appears to be, it doesn't appear to be favorable to the virus to survive here. So there is some aspect of heat and cold which will potentially inactivate the virus. But it's not absolute, because MERS virus, which is a kissing cousin of coronavirus, was mainly discovered and found in Saudi Arabia, in the desert amongst camels, which it gets pretty hot in the desert amongst camels, but they were still coming down with MERS and transmitting it to the camel drivers there.
Joel, you used the word I didn't understand. Can you describe autoclave? What does that mean?
An autoclave is a scientific instrument where, in fact, you heat things up to very high temperatures. that to the point that nothing living can survive when you heat it up to this temperature. And that's done by using steam under high pressure, and it raises it above usually 200 degrees Fahrenheit or more.
Great, thank you. Danny, do we have one more question from the chat?
Yeah, let's see. This one is another one from Catherine Wimbley. How can two people with no underlying medical conditions both have the coronavirus, yet one person can have no symptoms while the other person can die?
Good question. Who wants to take? Nina, would you like to take that?
I will start, and I'm sure Joel has something better to say, but this is a great question. And what would we give to know what the difference is? People suspect obviously underlying genetic traits, maybe your blood group, whether you had a certain vaccine or not. It is I've read very many different theories, but I'm not aware of a conclusion on that question. But Joel, I let you speak.
No, I 100% agree with you. I think one of the prevalent theories now is in fact, while the virus is constant, our cells in our bodies are quite different. And
Right.
so it's you have to think of it as a lock and key. You have the virus, which has those little proteinaceous knobs, and that has to be able to hook on or attach to the epithelial lining within our respiratory tract. And if that lining has the receptor on it, that receptor could differ from you or from I. And so that virus may attach much stronger to you or much stronger to me, depending on what's on our cells, not what the virus has.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. I have a question from Jude, who's 7. Joel, this question goes to you. How is this new coronavirus different from the other coronaviruses?
Nobody's 100% sure as of right now. As I said, most likely, as Nina pointed out, the binding of the coronavirus to our epithelial cells is much tighter than what would have normally been predicted. And we don't know why that's the case until we really study this virus more to really understand why it binds tighter, why it gets incorporated quicker, why when it's released it causes more physical damage within the immediate cells around us, which it's really the damage that it causes to the tissues that leads to most of the symptoms that we see from the infection. And if in fact it causes enough damage, it could potentially be extremely dangerous. And that's when these rare number of cases, as said, it's about 25% of the patients who get infected show no symptoms. About another 50% may show partial symptoms. And it's that top 20% that will show varying degrees of severity, from those having to be hospitalized to those that have to be put on a respirator to help them be able to breathe during the process while our body is repairing our respiratory tract.
Okay, great. So Nina, why is this strain of the coronavirus so much more effective than SARS was back in the early 2000s? This is from Mateo.
Yes, so Mateo, very interesting question. So the SARS coronavirus that emerged in 2003, I believe, made people, a much higher percentage of people very, very sick. And these people only at that stage, when they were sick, started shedding virus. And I mean by that, putting virus into the environment by coughing or sneezing and therefore infecting others. So it was kind of easy to see, oh, this person is sick, we can put him away, Are there other contacts that person has seen? We can put them in quarantine and wait it out. And therefore, we could track the virus very easy. So what happened with this SARS coronavirus number 2 is that many people that are infected show very mild symptoms or no symptoms, and they are still shedding virus in the environment, although they don't even know. So the mildly, they would think they have a cold, they won't go to the doctor, they still go on a trip, and they go to on the plane, and then they'll go to another country and start a little chain of transmission there. And only after a while, once one of the infected persons get actually really sick, we'll actually notice it. But by then, hundreds of other people have already gotten infected. So in that way, this current coronavirus is much more effective in transmitting. And also it can be transmitted just over a surface. So even if that person who just encountered a sick coronavirus person who did not see a sick person could get infected by touching a surface.
Okay, great, Nina. I have a follow-up question that really is the same as, will really make you go crazy, I think. How can people have the virus but not have symptoms?
I mean, that's a fair question. Maybe Joel has a good answer to this. I think it depends on specifically your body, your immunity. It depends on your age, right? It depends on comorbidity. It might likely also depend on how much virus you got as you became infected. Did you get a huge dose? Or did you get a slow dose, a very low dose, so your immune system has time to attack it? But generally, I think since the virus is pretty stable and the same, it's very dependent on your personal body and your immune system, your genetics, basically.
In other viral infections, it's dependent on the virus not only attaching to the cell surface, but for it to be incorporated into the cell. And in some instances, some viruses can attach to cells, but the cell doesn't have the mechanism to bring it inside the cell so that the virus can multiply. The damage that's really caused is by when the cells when the cells are lysed by the production of the virus, and it keeps on destroying more and more tissue.
When you say lice, what do you mean?
The cell literally blows up. The only way that the new virus that's produced within these cells can be released is either they're released slowly by a process called budding, or in fact, they cause the structure of the cell to fall apart, and then they're released into the environment.
Nina, what does the coronavirus do to your body?
So yeah, it causes severe harm, as you can see, from many people, unfortunately. It enters your body through your mouth or nose, and then it'll infect your respiratory tract, your breathing tube, and it'll make its way down to the lungs. And it'll mostly replicate in the lungs. And that's why you get all these flu-like symptoms that you get a pretty bad cough, maybe sometimes a little bit nose sniffles. I heard that's not so prominent, but you get fever and shortness of breath, just meaning you can't really breathe because the lung is infected. So that's what mainly happens during the 2 weeks that you're infected. In really bad cases, what can happen also is that when there's a lot of replication in the lung, your immune system comes and tries to fight it. And your immune cells, in that case, can also get infected and sort of completely overreact because they don't know what they're doing anymore. They are amassing other immune cells, and they're all coming, and what they're doing is, what they're supposed to do is killing the cells that are actually infected. But while they're overreacting, they can kill also your healthy lung cells. And in that case, you really have a bad impact on your lung, and it can cause a long-term damage, and it even in some cases can cause death. So coronavirus has a variety of spectrum that it can do to your body.
One other mechanism that seems to be in place of how the virus can get in is not only through your mouth or your nose, but also through your eyes. If you, in fact, rub your hands on a surface that has a virus and you go and rub your eyes, the virus can, in fact, attach to the epithelial with it, which are inside your eye socket, and be brought into the system, immune system.
Thank you, Nina and Joel. I think it's time to take some questions from the chat. Dania, do you have some questions for us?
Sure. I have a question from Jenna Beans 1. What are the chances for a second wave occurring like what happened with the flu in 1918?
Since Gina Beans 1 happens to be, I think, my daughter, I think I will respond to that. We, in fact, don't know what's going to happen with this. Some viruses like SARS, there was one major episode, or MERS, there was one major episode, and there wasn't any repeat episodes. With influenza, as we've seen, there's constant cycle of influenza every year, though the surface does change slightly. So, but with corona, we won't know that is the case until probably the fall. And any of you people who've watched television, you'll see Tony Fauci saying that he thinks, in fact, there will be a second rise, and which is exactly what happened actually in the 1918 Spanish flu. In fact, more people died in 1919 from the Spanish flu than in 1918, when you have the second wave of the virus come across. So Gina Beans 1, we just don't know the answer to that, now at least.
Okay, thanks Gina Beans 1. Danny, do you have any more questions?
Sure. One more here from Helena Schraff. Can you get infected by eating food with the virus on it?
Nina, let's Nina.
yeah, Nina. So I'm going to take this question because this is my sister-in-law. And up to my knowledge, the answer is no. Especially not cooked foods that will definitely destroy the virus and its lipid membrane. Obviously, if you purchase fresh fruits and veggies, please be sure to wash them, but it is a respiratory virus. It's not an enterovirus. It should not be causing infection when you eat in your gut. So be reassured, you can have dinner and don't have to worry about it.
All right. If you're just tuning in, my name is Latasha, and I'm here with Joel and Nina, and we're taking your questions about coronavirus. So now we're going to talk about transmission. Nina, can you start off with a reminder of how the virus is spread?
Sure, absolutely. So a reminder, the main form of transmission of this virus is via what we call droplet transmission. So it's tiny little water droplets that are filled with viruses. And as you sneeze or cough or speak or sing, you will propel those out into your environment, and people that are close to you, either they will directly be infected by ingesting them through eyes, either it gets in the eyes, nose, or the mouth, or you'll leave it on, they pick it up somewhere on their hands and then they touch their face. And that's what we do very, very frequently, right? Even if we don't really realize actively that we're doing this, and that's how it spreads. So the other part, so these lipid droplets are believed to have maximally can be propelled 6 feet away. So therefore, or 2 meters. Therefore, please try and keep the the distance to other people, because as we said, we don't know sometimes that we're infected, or we might have just slight symptoms, or you might not know that you're infected. So that way you protect yourself and others. The other way to transmit is to cough on or sneeze in your hands and then touch the surfaces, right? So there's doorknobs, there's elevator buttons, there's subway poles that many people touch all the time. And that way you can leave the virus there, somebody else can pick it up. Then touches his face, and voila, you have your virus transmitted and infected the next person. So yeah, that's generally the transmission.
Okay, our next question comes from Jasleen, who's 13. How can we stop this disease from spreading to one another besides staying at home? Is there anything else that we can do?
So yeah, as just to mention, staying at home is definitely the most safest and effective option, because you're not mingling, you're not seeing anybody, nobody can transmit or receive virus. What you can do, obviously, what you should do is like very often clean commonly touched surfaces you eat off, surfaces you use in the kitchen, right? Be vigilant with stuff you bring in from outside. Maybe have a change of clothes right away once you come in from the outside, and leave the ones that you use for outside in a specific designated area. And really just wash your hands. Wash your hands all the time. Wash them as much as you can, and try to avoid inside or outside to touch your face.
Thank you, Nita. Joel, this question is from Summer, who's 13. She says, China and other places around the world are taking drastic measures like cutting access to public transportation and closing down restaurants. Is all of this necessary? And if it didn't take place, if we didn't take these measures, how would the number of cases be affected?
That's a great question. And really, there's a couple of parts to it. Drastic measures have been taken by a number of countries, and those countries that have introduced those drastic changes or really stay on top of it have shown a slower increase in the number of cases. We don't know if that will actually be decrease the number of cases. It's just spreading it out over a longer period of time. Instead of, I think a lot of you have seen on television this rapid increase and then decrease in the virus. That would be the normal course of a virus in an untreated population. You'd have a very quick rise and then a subsequent fall off in it. By doing these procedures that Nina talked about, it's called mitigation, you're limiting your chances of being exposed to it. So it'll still happen, but it'll be over a much slower period of time. And that also will then not jam up our hospitals with having to deal with huge numbers all at one time. And so there's much more likely of a chance that you'll be able to be successfully treated, and there will be fewer ultimate deaths from it, rather than a very rapid increase and a sharp decrease.
Okay, great, thank you so much. Should we go to the chat and see if there are any questions?
Sure. I have a great question from Emma Chu. Emma Chu. Why can't COVID-19 go through your skin?
Well, it really depends on what your definition of skin is, because the epithelial lining your respiratory tract is very much skin. It's just a different type of epithelial that's on the surface of your hands. Also, when you tend to have calluses on your hands, you have different type of skin buildup. So the organism really doesn't get, is not able to attach very easily to outer surfaces, where the inner surfaces don't have these kinds of other protections. And also the inner surfaces tend to be bathed in antiviral, antibacterial. Saliva you have has antibacterial properties in it, antiviral properties in it, which can potentially kill. So it's not a very common mechanism for viruses of any type of virus to enter via surface skin.
Great, thank you. Can we get one more question from the chat?
Sure. I think we're going to touch on this subject in a second, but maybe we can kick it off. From Anya 2020, if you wash your hands with water only, will that get rid of the virus?
No. You may wash off some loose hanging virus, but you're not getting rid of the virus.
Oh, and also, Joel, there have been a couple of requests for you to tell us what epithelial tissue is. It's a term that you've used quite a bit. Could you tell us exactly what that is?
It's a common cell type. If you've ever looked at it, it's a flat cell with a single nucleus in it that covers most outer surfaces of our body, and also inner surfaces, obviously. So it's just a common cell type, just like red blood cells, a cell type. Epithelial is just the most common type of surface cell on humans.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm gonna switch over, and I think I'm gonna ask Nina this question. Is it safe to wash your clothes altogether if someone goes outside? This is from Sarah, that's 11.
So Sarah, yeah, that's a good question. And I can reassure you it is absolutely safe, because once you stick all these clothes together in the washing machine and you use detergent, a kind of soap, it will definitely inactivate the virus. So it cannot infect you anymore. As you, just to elaborate a little bit on the soap reaction with the virus, as you remember, the virus has this envelope and it has those spike proteins, and this envelope is actually a layer of fat, and it's chemically very, very similar to the soap molecules that are dissolved in water. And so the soap molecules just naturally feel attracted to the virus, and they sort of insert themselves into its envelope and sort of pry it apart. And so it makes it and completely deform it. So it cannot use its little spike proteins anymore to infect human cells. Basically, the key is lost to infect human cells, even though maybe it's RNA or DNA, the genetic material may still be active. It absolutely needs those spike proteins. So if you wash your hands and you rub them with soapy warm water, and then you rinse them, you should get rid of and this is also true for bacteria, right? With the lipid envelopes. It works for many pathogens. Then you'll get rid of it, and it'll also get rid of any virus on your clothes in the washing machine.
So what about hand sanitizer?
So ethanol also attack the virus and destroy the lipid membrane. It's a slightly different chemical reaction, but it'll have the same outcome. What you need to be aware of, though, that hand sanitizer needs to have at least 60% ethanol in it to be effective. And since you're not rinsing your hands afterwards, which gets rid of all these like killed viruses and germs and bacteria, be sure you use enough and you apply it everywhere. And it's always nicer after, I've heard like the very most efficient way of getting rid of the virus is the hand washing. Repeated ethanol rubbing is good, but it's not as good. Great.
If you're just tuning in, my name is Latasha, and I'm here with Joel and Nina, and we're taking your questions about the coronavirus. So our next question goes to Joel. This is from Divine, who's 8. Is there a cure for the virus? If not, how do people heal?
Right now, there is no cure for the virus. So there's two main emphasis now on how to cure people. One is identifying presently known drugs that will potentially impact on coronavirus. And this is being done by both individual scientists and large research labs. And the second mechanism is by producing an immunotherapy, so a vaccine. The chances of vaccine production are quite good from knowing other coronaviruses that they ultimately did produce vaccines against, but they were produced too late to have any impact on them. Now they have a variety of new rapid methods for creating antibodies, and that's what they're trying to incorporate now. And a lot of those now are in stage 1 and stage 2 clinical trials. That's to see how the immunization won't cause you more problems than the disease itself. As far as the repurposing of drugs, there's a lot of news in the paper on it, using hydroxychloroquine and another antibiotic, azithromycin, to in fact see if they impact. And there's a large clinical study going on right now, both in New York and in Washington, University of Washington and New York University, on the impact of this particular drug, if it will help treat coronavirus.
Okay, Danny, we're going to take our last question from the chat.
Oh my God, last one. That's so much pressure. Okay.
Okay, last two more from the chat.
Okay. Here's one that was asked earlier from Valentina and Camila. Does the coronavirus live or survive in water?
Good question. Who wants to take that one?
Well, the virus does need to stay in somewhat of a moist environment, because otherwise it literally can potentially dry out. So it has to be, and that's why it survives in droplets, or it survives in the respiratory tract, because they tend to be highly moist areas. I'm not sure if I've seen any study that said if it can survive in water alone over a period of time. And again, that would be also dependent on the temperature of the water. If you boiled that water, you would denature the virus, so that wouldn't be an issue. Or if you froze it, it could probably survive the freezing and then the rethawing of it. So it really depends on the temperature level that's at within water.
All right, that could be your research question when you grow up.
I am growing up, thank you.
I'm talking about the person that asked.
Go back and play with your bunny.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? One more question from the chat?
Sure. Last question from the chat. Let's see. We'll ask this one from Patricia Hornack. What about washing hands with soap and cold water? Does that help at all? Many public bathrooms don't have hot water.
Nina, can you take that one?
Yes, I can take that one. And yes, it will also work the same way. I imagine that with the warmth, all the reactions that I was talking about are a little bit more higher speed. Chemical reactions are more efficient with the higher temperature. But also, as soon as you use the soap that still is dissolved in cold water, it will still get rid of your viruses.
But it really also depends on how long you scrub your hands. And everybody says that you should be scrubbing them for at least 20 or 30 seconds and scrub them well. The water temperature, I agree with Nina, would probably be more effective at a higher temperature than colder. But if you wash your hands well, cold water would work fine.
Great. Okay, so if you're just joining us, we're with Nina and Joel, and we were answering your questions about coronavirus. We have one more question, and the question is from Fedor. He wonders, will the coronavirus always be part of our environment, or will it run its course and completely disappear?
Coronaviruses were first identified, I guess, in the 1930s, and they've been around ever since. So they're probably coronavirus, and again, there's not one coronavirus, it's a family, and you're seeing different iterations of that family. So corona that we're seeing now is different from SARS, is different from MERS, which are also coronaviruses, but are quite different in structure and how well they survive. So right now we don't know, and we won't know for a couple of years if in fact this will stay with us. There's a good possibility, like influenza has stayed with us for decades, centuries. We don't know, and we won't know for a few years.
Okay. Last question. How are scientists making medical cures and vaccines? This is from Noah, who's 13.
I mean, I can start, and then Joel can also fulfill. Just generally with a vaccine, what we're trying to do is prime the human body to give an immune response to a given pathogen. So it's already prepared in advance. What we do is either give them that inactivated for viruses, give them inactivated virus. So it's basically dead or killed virus, but still it has sequences to which the human immune cells that make antibodies can be specialized to, and you can still have an immune reaction. But there's also other ways of doing it, is taking just little sequences and present them to the of the virus instead of the whole virus itself, and present them to the body, inject them. You know, sometimes when you get your vaccines, you're being injected in the arm. And so you want to prime and tell the body, okay, be prepared, because when you see the real thing, then you should be ready, and you should have antibodies already made, basically, is the idea behind the vaccine.
What's an antibody?
So an antibody is a little protein that is made by an immune cell, and it attaches to the surface of viruses and to other pathogens, and it agglomerates it, and that way it can be cleared by the other body cells that have the that are supposed to get rid of these pathogens that are all glued together and cannot infect other cells anymore.
Okay. All right, I have one last question. This is the absolute last question, and I'm gonna take this one. And this is from Escala, and she is 11. She was like, what is one good thing about coronavirus? I'm gonna start out and say that most of research science has ground to a halt, but everybody who's working on the coronavirus is working overtime. And this has really made the level of collaboration in science to another level. There's no boundaries. People all over Europe and people all over the United States are working together and sharing their knowledge, all for the common good. And this is showing us a way, maybe a blueprint of how we can all attack other big issues, big social issues that affect us. And this is really how science should work, and how we should all work together to really do our part. Like just staying at home, you're doing your part. So I think that the coronavirus is showing us that we can all work together, no matter where we're from, and no matter where we live, no matter our political affiliation, anything. We're all working together for this common good. So thank you everyone for joining another of our student town halls, and thank you everybody who submitted questions. And thank you to our guests, Nina and Joel. for helping us to understand COVID-19 a little better. And thank you, Danny, for pulling out some wonderful questions from the chat. If you want to do home science, check out our Explore at Home Weekly Science Challenges. The first one is out now on YouTube, and the link is below. Stay up to date on BioBus remote programs. Fill out the interest form in the description and follow us on Facebook and Twitter and our new TikTok. Our handle is BioBus. And then if we didn't get to your questions, we're sorry. But if you fill out your interest form and give us an adult's email address, a scientist will try to get back to you as soon as possible. So be safe. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.